So what's a witch hunt? I was reading up on different periods in history where people were fired and scapegoated and demonized, and trying to see the commonality. So I put this list together myself. One common theme is the demonization of a group with little power and exaggerating their power and presenting them as extremely dangerous and the epitome of evil. But there's also the factor of a preemptive strike, because I thought, well, you know, women are pretty weak right now, but potentially we could be really strong. And that was true also during the periods of militant trade unionism and a stronger socialist left. There was also the fear that they could become stronger. Misogyny, certainly in the case of the witch hunt against feminism right now, and the pattern of older women as targets, which is really interesting. That was true in the Salem witch trials. Authoritarianism, fear, and intimidation as an attempt to silence opponents, political opponents, scapegoating to divert attention to real causes of problems. The witch hunting is not just an act of one employer or one individual. There's a mass aspect to it. It's a bullying. There has to be some level of mass participation or going along with the witch hunt. Guilt by association. Anyone who defends a witch or associates with a witch is obviously a witch. So everyone wants to, you know, not get near people who've been labeled as such. Punishment for thought crimes. Basically having wrongthink, having ideas that are not accepted, and that of course has a chilling effect on free speech for everyone. Conviction without due process, or on what was called during the Salem witch trials spectral evidence. Spectral evidence being that basically you could your words or just your eyes could attack someone from afar in spirit and torment the victim. That's the idea of spectral evidence. And I think I was convicted of on the basis of spectral evidence. And then naming names and condemning witches in order to avoid suspicion falling on oneself. So there's been a lot of witch hunts in the history of the United States. These are just a few of the most significant ones. Of course, the Salem witch trials in 1692, 1693. The Red Scare during World War I and into the early 1920s that targeted socialists, the IWW, anarchists, immigrants, union activists, and anti-war protesters. The McCarthy era, which is the most well-known with the Red Scare, loyalty oaths, blacklisting, anti-communist and anti-gay witch hunts that went from the late 1940s into the 50s. Ongoing anti-lesbian witch hunts in the military from the time of the 1950s through about 2010. The no platform, and currently, the no platforming of leftists and anti-war journalists from mainstream publications and social media. Chris Hedges would be an example, who was iced from the New York Times for being against the Iraq War. And then, of course, what's going on now with Julian Assange. And then the contemporary turf hunting of gender critical feminists that happened to me and many other women currently. So what is it about the nonprofit world? I have been immersed in the nonprofit legal world for actually more than 20 years. I worked for Legal Aid before working for Disability Rights California. What is it about that that would allow for this to happen? I mean, is there a reason, are there certain milieus and certain jobs that would be ripe for these kind of witch hunts? And I think there are, actually. It seems that women who work in professional settings, lawyers, or authors, artists, and university professors, fields where women have made the most gains since the second wave are the primary targets for modern day anti-feminist witch hunts. Now, the nonprofit legal world is overwhelmingly female, including the attorneys, overwhelmingly female attorneys, and of course the support staff, many women of color. And the main reason for this is that women have significantly less opportunity as lawyers in private practice or in the law firms. Lawyers are found in the government positions and in the nonprofit world primarily. And of course, they're still male dominated. There are some men, and the few men that are there are disproportionately found in upper management and often do have greater opportunities for advancement than the women who work there. I think there's some other characteristics of the nonprofit world, a tendency to micromanagement, which basically limits the opportunities of the women who work there. They are mostly non-union in the United States at will employment, so there's very few rights for staff. And gender ideology in a corporate style, diversity, equity, and inclusion have gained a strong foothold as they cost nothing and eliminate the troublesome category of sex, and they keep the staff in their various silos. So how is it that the civil rights organization, which has done really good work, and I'm very proud of the work I've done when I was employed at DRC, how is it that it was so captured by this ideology that a reference to biological sex was interpreted as transphobic hate speech? How did that happen? Now, the organization I work for, DRC, Disability Rights California, is the largest nonprofit legal firm in California, and it has a really good reputation for fighting for people with disabilities. And again, is in many respects typical of the nonprofit legal world that I talked about earlier. Corporate style diversity training started happening. I guess there's always been diversity training, but they've changed. It changed hugely. Much more use of corporate consultants, the same people who advise McDonald's about diversity, have been involved in training the nonprofits, and particularly, at least Disability Rights California. And those trainings started with trainings that were about sexual harassment and racism, and respecting people's various ethnicities, to this extreme ideological training that told us that sex didn't exist. Basically, that it was an invention of, this is almost a direct quote, invention of white colonialism. And so gender or gender identity started being substituted for sex. And so this is just a development that started happening just the last few years, where there was a focus on pronouns. You were urged to list your pronouns on signature lines, and asking any questions or disagreeing with any of this, or declining to declare your pronouns, even though you weren't technically required to do so. Of course, I didn't. Would label you a transphobe. And I was actually labeled a transphobe a few years earlier during a diversity training, because I asked some questions and also said that my lesbianism was sex-based. My orientation was towards women and as a sex, and I was called transphobic for that.